Welcome back, everybody.
Yes.
How are you guys?
I'm good.
Yes.
It's like 85 degrees Fahrenheit here, and I have to go to New York on Saturday, and I'm really upset about it.
What is it in
Snowing.
Snowing, yeah. Oh, I did see Casey Neistat's video. He was, snowboarding through New York City in the snow. So, yeah.
Why do you have to go to New York, Andrew?
Company retreat.
Oh, one of those.
You could retreat from the retreat.
Yeah, well, I like our company retreats, so I'm looking forward to it.
That's fun. A ski trip in New York City.
There you go.
Well, why don't we dive in on this episode? We've got special guest, Jeff Dickey, or JD. Welcome. We're super duper excited to have you.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I think probably people will know you right now from Mise, the version manager for pretty much every language and tool at this point. There's a handful of core supported things, but then the backlog of like every ASDF plugin it supports too, which is kind of amazing. But if I remember right, you used to work at like Heroku. Did you work on the CLI there?
Yeah. I led an effort to rewrite it actually from Ruby into Node. So it seemed to made sense at the time, at least.
How was that? How did that go? And also, was that kind of your start into building CLI tools? I feel like you're somebody who's pretty expert in that at this point.
Reflecting on it now is actually because portable Ruby was a problem. Because that was the biggest issue we had with Ruby was distributing it. That, we had to make sure that our end users had Ruby set up and that it didn't conflict with their local installs. And that was a big reason for moving to Node, is because Node did offer a single binary. And so it just made it a lot easier to do distribution that way. But now, as we'll get to, like I've worked at single binary for Ruby now. So
yeah, that's interesting. Because I remember like I came from Python and was trying to do like cross-platform stuff. And it was like, I was looking at easy ways to do that. And it was like, yeah, Python is pre-installed on Ubuntu. So that's easy. macOS had Ruby pre-installed, but it's like that version changes depending on the operating system version. And so you can't always depend on those things. It always seemed hard to build a single binary for those languages. And there were many little projects for that, but I'm not entirely sure what makes it hard to do that. I don't know if you have ideas on that, but that was something that always kind of surprised me. It was like, why isn't it easy to just kind of build a single executable out of a Python program or a Ruby program?
it's a lot to ask for end users to maintain this development stack for a language that they may not even use. Or even if they do, that could be a problem too. Like we would have issues where users working on at the time would be like a Ruby 187 app, but like our CLI doesn't support that. But because that would be the Ruby on path, it just, it'll explode in not good ways. So sometimes we get stuck on the single binary idea, but like that's one solution to the problem. But really, it's like you just want to sandbox your CLIs such that developers, it doesn't mess with their local setup and they don't need to have anything pre-installed.
Yeah, and I guess that's where you need to mess with the load path or whatever. So it's like, don't use Ruby gems and its default folders or whatever. It's like, you really need sort of control over those things. That way you can say, I'm going to only load my vendored copy of this library or something if you need those. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And it's a hard problem with development tools in particular, because sometimes you do want the Ruby on path. This is actually like a perennial problem with Node. I guess Ruby has it too, where like, I don't know if you guys ever used Foreman, where it was like a popular thing with Heroku. I think at the time that was a Ruby application, but like, because it's calling other Ruby applications, you sort of want a Ruby for Foreman, but then the Ruby that Foreman uses to call applications, you want to be the system or like whatever the user has configured at that time. It's a very hairy problem for sure. And probably it's fair to say, I would argue that like in Node and Ruby, they haven't quite figured it out. Python does, because Python has the like Python 3.9 binaries, right? This kind of sidesteps that, at least as far as like minor version to go. It's probably one of the few things they get right, I would say.
That's funny. I haven't used Python in quite a while, so I don't think I've even looked into any of that stuff. If that's more recent-ish, I guess 3.9 you said.
Well, so I'm sure you've
Or-
seen like sometimes you have to call Python 3, right? As
Yeah.
yeah.
I got into Ruby right at the time that it was like Python 3 is out, but everything is only compatible with Python 2. So people didn't seem to want to adopt Python 3. And it got to be very confusing for a few years there.
Oh yeah.
That was kind of or something that they, I guess by putting the major version in the executable, it kind of helps with selecting the right version, I guess.
So they give you binaries that have just Python 3, and then the minor version. So Python 3.9 or Python 3.10. I don't think it goes beyond that. So the nice thing is if you have a shebang, you can just put in the shebang Python 3.9, and then you know that that's going to be Python 3.9, even if there's a different Python 3 on path. I think I've seen this with Ruby. I don't know if they quit doing it, but I feel like back 10 years ago, I remember seeing like a Ruby 1.9 binary or something. And I think it never really caught on or something, but I don't know what the story is there. This is pretty unique to Python, and it really does solve this problem because oftentimes it is just like the minor version you need to have right.
Right.
Beyond that, it usually works pretty well.
Yeah, because if they're following semantic versioning, the third digit there or whatever doesn't really matter most of the time. You just want the latest version of it usually. And it's like, who cares? It's probably not going to break anything. Yeah, that's interesting because I don't think I've really ever seen that in Ruby. And I thought maybe that the Python 2 and Python 3 thing was like a Debian package thing or something that they did. Because like if you install PostgreSQL 18 or 17 or whatever, they have separate package names and you can run them side by side and stuff. And I don't know if that stems out of the like Linux packaging world or something, and that came on as an idea because Python's, so heavily used in Ubuntu applications and core stuff there. Maybe it was out of that or something.
It's very likely. Yeah.
Yeah. So, over the years, like I learned, where did I even start? Probably learning Ruby, installed RVM, I would imagine. And then CHRuby and RBM came out and I started using those. And then eventually, of course, Rails gets into now you use Webpacker and you need a node install as well, which leads you to like using NVM. And then at some point, ASDF comes out and it's like, oh, why don't we just have one tool that does this? And that was all written in Bash. And I've used that for a fair bit of time. But there were really nice things that like RBM had environment variable management built in or as a plugin or whatever that you could add really easily. But I asked them in the ASDF project, is that ever something they want to do? And they pretty much said no. And I was a bit bummed by that. So I hacked my own little plugin there. It was Bash. It was easy to add a line to go run another script to load environment variables. But I feel like what you've done with me is awesome because you have like, you can load environment variables from files, from the TOML config. Like there's just so many, you can run a script, I believe too. Like you can just do almost anything you could ever imagine with it. And I feel like there's maybe it's your Heroku experience and stuff since then, but like I feel like you have a really, really good understanding of like, I need this tool to be very flexible. And we have a few different options for everything. And it seems extremely well thought out. So I was curious, where did you stumble on, I should probably go build this? And how did Mise get started? How do you think about designing it? It just felt like it had a level of polish, nothing else that I had used quite had, at least for something as broad as every language version manager.
So I've been in kind of the dev infra sort of world for a long time now. I started in like 2014 with Heroku. And so like getting runtime set up on machines, whether it's in CI or local, has just been something I've been doing for a very, very long time. And I was working at AWS and was working on some of their CI infrastructure and basically the base Docker image. And it was using ASDF. And we just had this design restriction, the way we want it to work gets right back into the minor version thing where we didn't want to pin the patch version of the runtimes. Simple as that. We wanted to leave that loose because we wanted application developers just always be on the latest. You should always be on the latest 3.4 whatever of Ruby, right? And we don't want to have users get a PR and have to like stamp that or something. So like that was a design requirement, and ASDF was steadfastly opposed to this. They thought that version should be pinned. And so I think like Mise, it really started from the beginning. I thought that it needed to be sort of maximalist in terms of what workflows it should support. So like with shims versus path, I think it's the first version manager I'm aware of that does both. Usually it'll be one or the other, but they both have pros and cons. And so I just did both. And I think that does work very well. Users complain about the behavior in one way, I say use it the other way. There's no perfect world. You can't solve all the problems with both of them. And likewise, when it comes to how developers want to specify the version, like if you want Ruby 3, if you want Ruby 3.4, if you want Ruby 3.4.2, it's up to you. And so I think that's done well for the project. It's needed to grow quite a bit. It's been a lot of work to support kind of all these use cases, but I think especially when it came to dev tools, I'd worked with it long enough that I had a pretty good idea of what the scope needed to be to kind of cover all its bases. And through some iteration, through a few years, I think we got there.
Are you tired of babysitting your job queues? Let us do it for you. JudoScale monitors and autoscales your job queues so you can stop babysitting and get back to coding. We support Sidekick, SolidQ, GoodJob, and just about every other job backend in Rubyland. And of course, we autoscale your web services too. JudoScale scales up your apps faster than any other autoscaler, so request timeouts and backed up job queues are mitigated before they become a problem. JudoScale has a free plan you can use forever, so there's literally no risk, whether you're on Heroku, AWS, Render, or any other cloud platform. Visit judoscale.com and get your job queues under control.
I forget what I was doing originally, but that was absolutely what I ran into with ASDF was like, I really just want to specify Ruby 3.4 or even just Ruby 3 in general sometimes, because I want the bug fixes and the security fixes automatically. And sometimes I don't care about the minor version because none of my code there is tied to a specific thing. But I remember ASDF being very strict about that. And except for like, there was a cool thing of, I think the Node plugin maybe, had the aliases for LTS or whatever. And I was like, oh, that's nice. There were some warts with that or whatever too. And I ran into something with that. And I don't remember what it was exactly, but it was like coming to me is just like, oh, you've just kind of just addressed all of these inconsistencies between how Node versions are managed in Ruby ones and other languages and stuff. And that felt really refreshing because it was like just a little bit of chaos when you're trying to use all these different tools. And ASDF has so many plugins that aren't necessarily maintained by the author of ASDF itself. So everybody has their own weird little things. And I felt like, yeah, you did make that really consistent. And the path thing was really awesome because the shims, I guess, are beneficial in cases where like you have a systemd process that needs an actual executable path, like a full path, and can't be evaluated dynamically or whatever. But is that also the path thing something that makes it faster to, I guess Mise is also not written in Bash because ASDF I've noticed got pretty darn slow for me at some point. But Mise is also not written in Bash and super fast for managing versions and stuff. So I'm curious about that. Like, for one, explain to people the difference between the shims and the path setup, and then your architecture behind the scenes of it's written in Rust, right?
Yeah, it's written in Rust. To be fair to ASDF, which has since been rewritten in Go, but had they would have stuck with Bash, they would not have been able to do the version prefix stuff that users have often wanted. Not well. It would have impacted performance, which is already poor with Bash. so much that it wouldn't have been worth doing. It would have required a rewrite, I think. So shims and path. So version managers have largely two main methods that they use to, let's say when you type in bundle install, what version of Ruby that's using under the hood. And so the most common way is with shims. And so a shim is sometimes a little bash script. In Mise's case, it's actually a symlink to Mise, but because the symlink isn't named Mise, it knows it's a shim, and that's how it works.
Nice.
It basically launches Mise every time, and it does like the version, okay, tries to find the Mise toml or the tool version, whatever the configuration is, figure out what version it should actually use and proc to that. And then the var variable method, or the path version, I don't think there's a good name that encapsulate, but basically what you do is, well, to the user, what they think it is like when I CD into a directory, it wires up my runtimes. That's actually the bad way to do it. The way that Mise does it, and the way all good tools do, is it reloads every single time the prompt is displayed. And the reason for that is there are times when you want it to refresh when you didn't change directory, such as if you edit the Mise toml, right? Or if you type in Mise, you use the command to change, say, Ruby version, right? Then like you want that to take effect immediately. You don't want to have to CD out and in, would be a terrible experience.
Right.
So the performance cost just depends. If you call a shim in a loop in a bash script, then you pay that penalty for Mise to load, which is pretty light. It's about 10 milliseconds. It sort of depends on your configuration or machine. 10, 15 probably. Or do you want to pay it every time your prompt is displayed? Which Mise does some short circuiting there to sort of be able to tell, like, okay, there's like a fast path that I think can run in 4 milliseconds if it can like detect that probably nothing changed. So, it just kind of depends. But really, I think that both of these are bad, because the environment variable method, that only works in interactive prompt when the prompt is displayed, right? If you have a script and you do CD inside of that script, it doesn't necessarily work. Mise is doing some tricky stuff, and it's hooking into like CHPWD and ZSH. So it will try to do the best it can, depending on the support of the shell. I can't even remember all the ins and outs off the top of my head, but I think we can do it in the three big ones, bash, ZSH, and fish. But that can sometimes be a downside. Shims tend to be more reliable. That is often what I suggest people use with like Docker, for example, because it's just sort of doing that resolving every time. And the biggest downside, I think, with shims is, for me, it's just which. The shell command which will just points to the shim, which is usually not what you want. I like when I say which, I get the real binary that I'm about to call. It makes diagnosing problems a lot easier. Probably works a lot better with LLMs, right? Because that's what they're going to do too. And the more like, oh, okay, I got a shim. Now I got to do Mise which node, right? It's adds that interaction, right? But tasks are the solution to the whole thing, though, because then you don't need either one of these.
Okay, explain those, because I remember Andrew telling me about tasks, and I don't think I quite wrapped my head around him.
Yeah, we use them kind of extensively. I love them. And I also love the fact that I can use Mise X in those tasks to just make sure everything's better. And the shebang, like being able to use Mise in your shebang is even nicer. So yeah, I'm a big fan of the task system.
Yeah. So another problem with environment variable stuff is it requires users to put a ZSHRC config into their shell, which sounds easy enough. But if you've got a big company and you need to roll this out, you might want to do other configuration once you get more advanced Mise things like Mise M. You might want to set little things like that. But then you really get to a point where like the ZSHRC needs to be just so for it to work. And figuring that out, it can be tricky, especially to newer developers. Most developers don't want to think about path and all this stuff. And so like I've done the best I can around that, but there's some inevitable things there. Even just having to modify ZSHRC in the first place is a little bit of a headache. So task is, just think of it as a bash script. It literally is a bash script. You can call it as a bash script. It works like that. It just has some special comments that decorate it to add a description, and it can take an arguments, help, stuff like that. It just sort of lets you build some structure around bash scripts. And when you call one of those, it loads that same Mise environment. So it gets all your tools, your environment variables, all that stuff will be wired in as if you were running a shim or Mise X or had the shell extension in your CSHRC. But I think the advantage is that it's very reliable, right? The way one user runs a task is going to be pretty much the same as another user. In my opinion, it's the dream of something like dev containers, but with something that is not nearly as heavyweight to use.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. That sounds really useful. I'm going to have to start checking that out after we finish this. I know, Andrew, you had some questions like Rust versus Go. When production breaks, you want to quickly understand and fix it, not sift through logs for the next hour. That's where Honeybadger comes in. Honeybadger notifies you of errors and outages and puts performance in context to help you fix the issue faster. Learn more at honeybadger.io. That's www.honeybadger.io.
I was wondering because I did a little peruse through your GitHub. My bad. Didn't want to peek in on everything there, but I see that you're a pretty prolific Rust developer, and Go has been getting more and more popular for kind of developer tooling. So I was wondering why you chose Rust, but it could just be preference. So
I despise Go, and not because of anything bad about the language. I use it at work and it's fine. It is soulless. I've never enjoyed programming less than when I'm writing Go. You're not able to build interfaces. Like the way one developer writes Go looks the same as another developer. And there's no fun. It drives me up the wall. I can't stand it.
There you go.
Just for that reason alone. I think early in the days, before I wrote Mise, I didn't know Rust. I tried to learn it and wasn't able to. Obviously, this is pre-LLM, right? So it'd be different now. I wouldn't have to actually know. But at the time, certainly I needed to know how to write Rust. I tried to learn it before and I gave up. I couldn't figure it out and came back to it a couple of years later and it kind of settled with me. Whereas I could write Go just fine. But I did benchmark it. And actually for the shell extension thing, every millisecond matters. And I can't remember what those benchmarks said, but it definitely gave Rust the edge for sure. I don't know if there's another language, maybe Zig could be even faster still. Don't know.
Right.
I think Rust is fast enough. Don't often hear complaints about the performance.
We'll keep an eye out for the assembly branch at some point.
Yeah. Get an LLM to rewrite it in assembly.
Yeah.
We've been talking pretty extensively just about Mise, but you have a lot of other really great projects. You want to talk about FNox?
Yeah. FNox or Fort Knox. So secrets was a long-standing feature request for Mise. Understandably so, right? It does environment variables, but people don't really like putting plain text environment variables in. And so there was this experimental stuff I'd worked on for a while to use something like SOPs, if you're all familiar with that, which is basically a way that you can have a JSON file can be for environment variables, is often used for, but it could just be any JSON or YAML or TOML file. But it gives you a way to encrypt it and then commit that encrypted into your code base. And then you can use something like Auge or in Amazon KMS key or some decryption to decrypt it, which I think is a fantastic way to handle secrets, right? Right up until like quantum computing is able to figure out what's in there, and then we're all screwed anyways. But so that was kind of the model that I had been using. And what people really wanted for secrets was 1Password. That was what people wanted. But Mise can't really do that. It can't make a network call every time you run a task. It's too much. It's way too much. It's going to be slow. You're going to hit rate limits. It'd be awful, awful experience. And because these are secrets, I don't want to cache them. I don't want to put your secrets in some cache on disk. That's what you're trying to avoid. So originally I just did it because it needed to be a separate CLI so that like it doesn't have to refresh that environment all the time. And just by virtue of not being part of Mise and being this other thing, it can just refresh when it works in a lot of ways the same as Mise, but has an fnox.toml where you can either have encrypted environment variables or you can have remote ones like 1Password or Amazon Secret Manager or things like that. It's a lot like Mise where it's like I want to give choice. I think the encrypted way is the way to go, because it's just faster. But if you really want to use 1Password, which people do because it's super convenient, that option's there. I wouldn't say I've totally nailed the caching thing. Still kind of noodling on it because even in that world, like when you CD in, it still has to load everything. It's a lot better, but I have some ideas, but we'll see what I can come up with there. But that's basically it. It's just fast secrets in your environment when you go into projects.
I think encryption is the way to go too. I mean, sometimes we'll use like the OP 1Password CLI to grab things from our shared password vault, but we also have like our own kind of encryption system going on. And my CTO wanted me to specifically ask you about this because I think that's something that we're definitely like, okay, this could really we could really consolidate a lot of stuff if we use this.
I've actually been thinking about this week. Like, there's this workflow of like, I got stuff in 1Password, but I want to get it into my repo encrypted. I think that's a workflow that should be more native. It isn't right now, but it wouldn't take that much work.
Yeah.
So I think there should be something there where it is kind of a cache, maybe a manual one where you have to like run fnox sync or something. And then that would pull things out from 1Password, put it in encrypted. And I also think like some of the stuff around like Auge could be a little bit better, managing the life cycle around that. A lot of that is kind of left up to the user to figure out how you manage the public keys and stuff. I could probably do more there.
No, I like the sync idea because I wouldn't have any problem doing that. How often is your password? Well, your password should be changing more often than it probably is, but it in likelihood is probably not. So if it does change, just having to run sync and then it's there, I'm good to go.
I mean, you could run it on scheduled GitHub action workflow, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of those. Next thing I wanted to ask you about, unless you have anything else you want to say about fnox, was Pitchfork.
Pitchfork I'm excited about. So Pitchfork is a daemon runner. And I guess it sort of competes with like systemd in a way. But it's really more for developers. You could run like long-running daemons with this. I'll tell you that the use case that I find annoying is I go from project to project. I CD in and like I want to run the doc server or the application server or anything. And like I always forget, I got to run it. And even with LLMs, it's like kind of a pain. Prompt it to start. And like, I don't really like running LLMs, the daemons inside an LLM. I don't know. You can have another tab open where you run npm run server or whatever, but like Rails server probably for a lot of your listeners, but I don't know. I kind of hate managing that other thing. Then sometimes I forget that it's there and I try to run it again. It's like, that's already running that port. Or I'm running two different things on different ports. So that was the problem that I've always had. So I just wanted to be like, I CD into a directory. It starts up the servers for that project. So they're just there. And then if I leave that directory, then they go away. In kind of an automatic way where like if I have 5 terminals in one, obviously it's not going to run 5 of them. That's kind of the idea, is that it's this automatic daemon runner for development services. And it's coming along. I'd started it probably a year ago, kind of got it to an experimental state where it was working. I gave it another pass a couple months ago and really kind of spruced it up. I got it to what I think is a good 1.0 and seems to be humming along. I haven't been seeing a lot of bug reports, which I'm happy about because trying to diagnose what's wrong with the thing running daemons is a lot trickier than something you're just like calling as a CLI. Seems like it's going to go pretty well for people. Another thing I've run into is like, I'm sure like all of you, I use Docker a lot. You can't run the systemd in Docker, or at least you're not supposed to. So like I've done this where you have to like, the host is like using systemd to like launch, and it's clunky. Pitchfork is just a Rust CLI, so it doesn't need any special system stuff. It can just run daemons anywhere. There's also like, it's similar to Supervisor D, I think. It's kind of an older tool around this. In some ways, you could just think about that, but with TOML.
Yeah, I think that's pretty cool. Last library I wanted to talk about was usage, because I think that's really freaking cool.
Yeah, usage, we'll see. I'm actually a little negative on the future there because of LLM. So usage is my CLI, is like Swagger for CLIs. And we can generate documentation from CLIs, but what people really like it for is completions. And that powers, Mise has very complicated completions to where you can mount, like it gets into the task stuff, right? So if you do Mise run, the way you run a task, and hit tab, you can complete crazy things. it's pretty easy to configure because it's all built on this usage thing that I wrote, this spec, and it makes it pretty easy to decorate. So like, let's say you had a Mise task to like list users using an API. It takes like a couple lines of code. You just like define the completion in that Mise task and say curl this thing, and like you just have to new line separated things, right? The reason I say I'm not sure is because I think with agentic programming, agents don't use these. They have other ways of getting this information. And so I think like the days of us actually hitting tab at the terminal might be behind us, but it works really well for me. Because I have a lot of CLIs, I use usage in all of them. And that if nothing else, it makes it so I can have consistent docs, consistent man pages, consistent everything across all my stuff. And I've been using Rust for everything, but if I ever wanted to do it in another language, it's agnostic to that, which is quite cool.
I'm a big terminal guy, and what you said about us not using the terminal much longer made me freaking die inside a little bit. But
not the terminal, no completions.
Yeah, the completions, right? But me using the terminal, like I want to drive. But I was like, oh my god, because completions have always been tricky for me to like get working correctly. You know, you got to have this here and that there, and you got to, you know, make sure the brew site Z functions are in or whatever. And I was like, this is so nice to be able to just like use these kind of magic comments, because this is a workflow I'm very familiar with. These documentation comments at the top of the file. I also feel like it makes it easier for the LLMs to use as well. And then it makes it easier for me to use, right? And then I also like that you can dump it out to Markdown. I'm a big fan of that too. So
yeah, that may be where it has a strong future. Another thing about LLMs is I can make the integrations a lot better. So that's been on my list, is like for all the different CLI frameworks for all the different languages out there. It'd be great if they had some usage plugin for that so you could export it. Those are super easy for me to write now. So,
yeah, nice. Are there any other projects that you're working on that you're excited about? I saw your GitHooks one. That looks pretty cool.
Precompiled Rubies.
Oh, yeah, yeah. You ready to move on to Precompiled Rubies?
We got to talk about that. We can't forget it.
All right, let's go.
Yeah.
I was going to say, like, you know, Ruby, ever since even until recently, like, there's just not been any precompiled versions, it feels like. So I run a little hosting platform called Hatchbox, and like, people will spin up a $5 server, but if their first deployment is compiling Ruby, that will take 15, 20 minutes or something. So I was like, why don't I just go precompile Ruby and just go back through, and wrote a script to go like, ever since I think up to like 2.6 or 2.7, we just compiled the latest version of those. And then newer, like Ruby 3 or something, we do like every version. So we just have like our archive of those. But the thing I discovered, not knowing a whole lot about like what actually happens when you're compiling Ruby, you know, in the past, you've needed libreadline, and the version of that, you get libreadline 3 or 4, and different package versions, different Ubuntu versions end up with different names and whatever. But then you also run into the issue of like, there's a prefix directory that gets hard coded as like, this is where Ruby is going to live. And I didn't know anything about that really until I moved it and realized, oh, it's just looking for that old directory all the time. But then I guess Homebrew and Mike McQuaid had built a portable version of Ruby to run on Mac OS, and I guess maybe on Linux now too, with Homebrew on Linux. And that's kind of the foundation of what you have running for Mise now with the precompiled Rubies, right?
Yeah. So I think this story starts for me back a little ways with Python, because Python had the same exact problem. And us and Astral, the UV guys, both just for our users wanted faster Pythons. And so there was a guy, name's escaping me right now, but he had been just kind of working on portable Python as a side project kind of thing, and had some success with it. And Astral took it over and spearheaded the development of it. And for me, as I picked it up at the same time, I wasn't sure if that was something users wanted, because it was kind of breaking change. Like, these binaries are not as compatible, but they're so fast. And so I left it as a vote. What do you guys want? You know, this is a lot earlier in Mise's days. And it was unanimous. They all wanted precompiled. And so we went with that. And I'm so glad we did, because it's so much smoother to use Python and change versions, everything. So naturally, with Ruby, it was the same story, right? It takes minutes to compile these stupid things, and very frustrating, especially if you do use patch versions, right? You got to have 3.4.1, 3.4.2, 4.3, it's terrible. So yeah, Homebrew had a portable Ruby project, but it was very purpose built for Homebrew. It wasn't a general purpose thing. And they explicitly called out that that's not the goal of the project, not what they were working on. And then Andre Arco, he picked it up and he had done some work for his RB project. I think that I want to own this thing. I want to own it myself. Just the supply chain security stuff is something I'm really sensitive to. I got hundreds of thousands of users, and I feel a big responsibility that if I'm compiling stuff, it's secure. I like to trust as few people as possible. And so I was like, I'm just going to take this on and see how much work it is to finish this out and try to get it into Mise and see what happens. But I forget when, I want to say maybe November, December, I added it into Mise as an experimental thing. Had some people try it. They ran into some bugs. There's something weird with SSL, some glibc thing, smattering of things. It really didn't take a lot more effort from where it was. But I guess it must have been about 2-3 weeks ago. I think DHH made a mention of it on Twitter.
Yeah.
And frankly, I kind of forgot about it. I was kind of letting it just sit there, let people test it out. But then I was like, it's been a while since I've heard about any real problems here. Let's pick a date to get everybody switched over. So I think that's going to be August 1st. But I think it does show a warning right now that this is going to happen. And so you can opt in now to get the portable ones. And actually kind of through all that, a lot more people tried it. I think they found another bug or two. I imagine there may be another couple hidden in there somewhere that we'll uncover. But it seems to be going pretty smoothly, which I'm pretty happy about. So we'll see what it's like when I flip the switch. But obviously, these are not Mise binaries. They're there for RBM. I hope everybody uses them, just like what happened with Python. I don't actually know why Ruby doesn't just do this, but for whatever reason, or Python for that matter. But it's so good for the ecosystem. It makes a huge difference. It's not just the time. It's all the apt-get stuff. People bounce so quickly. I get complaints with Mise because of things people have to do to apt-get install stuff, or they need to have Homebrew and they need to. Users hate that, and they're not going to use your language because of it. It's just the way it is. Yeah. So, yeah, it's been a long frustration of mine too, in part because I get the complaints. So I'm hoping that'll be no more come this summer.
That makes a lot of sense, and that was you answered one of the questions I was going to ask. Was I knew Andre and their team was working on that, and I was curious. I saw that your repo is a fork of that, I believe.
Yeah,
and that
Andre did quite Andre's done more work on it than I have. Yeah, and in Homebrew, I've done very little, but there's just been a couple things to.
It makes sense though. If you're the one installing it, then you should be responsible for that, and you're going to be the ones getting the complaints if something is wrong or whatever. So it makes a lot of sense that you want to own it, and so you can fix the things and truly understand what's going on there and whatever. Yeah. So
with Python, I'm happy to let Astral own it, but there's no equivalent to that here.
Yeah, no, right. Yeah, because I don't know. I think there may be some talk or whatever of there may eventually be something like that happening in Ruby officially. That would be awesome. And then these efforts could hopefully be combined or whatever. But yeah, I remember I used to go to RBM's wiki and look for, if you're compiling on Ubuntu or Debian, grab this giant long list of packages to install before you compile Ruby. And it was all these tools, you don't really know what they are. You're just I just want to use Ruby. So I blindly install these 12 packages or whatever. And then over time too, Ruby removes the need for libreadline. There's a pure Ruby version of it. And so more recently, the required sort of dependencies for compiling Ruby is a very small list, thankfully, compared to what it used to be. And that was one of the things I spent some time trying to figure out with. I rewrote the new Rails getting started guide. And one of the things I was like, rather than the old guide, which just said install Ruby, and once it's installed, you can gem install Rails. I was like, we need to help people install Ruby. So I ended up adding the install Ruby guide there, which uses Mise, but it has some of those install these packages on Mac OS or Linux, or if you're on Windows, you should use WSL and more or less still follow the Linux instructions. And it still felt like this sucks as someone who wants to jump into Rails. They don't care about the internals of Ruby or any of that. They just want to use Rails. And even having a version manager is a little bit of a annoyance as well, but it makes it so nice because when you want to switch to the new version, now you'll just be able to say, Mise install, Ruby 4.0 or 4.1 or whatever. And it'll just be like, oh, cool. That's why we have that. And that makes sense. But with the whole compilation steps, it was just like, no wonder that our community doesn't have many juniors and they're going to Node because it's so much easier to get started. So I'm super excited about that. I'm going to have to make a pull request when the precompiled Rubies go live, because that will be an even shorter install guide, or maybe that can go away entirely. But some of those dependencies like OpenSSL or whatever need some tweaks to be able to be fully portable. I was just curious what goes into that, because I think most of us use Ruby and we've just run the same steps to compile it, but we've never really understood what's going on here, what's configurable. I know you can install like GMP and that makes Big Decimal more efficient or something. And like, we just don't know. We use Ruby. We don't work on Ruby itself. So I was just curious to hear your expertise on what happens there.
There is some base level of support that Ruby has been working on. I don't know how far back this goes, but there is a flag that you can use when compiling it. I forget what it is, but it's essentially the portability flag. And that kind of gets you started. Don't know exactly what that is, but I would assume it's going to bake things in. It's not going to rely on shared objects being there. It's going to try to bake as much in as it can. And beyond that, it's just a lot of little things. It's like, for example, one of the things I fixed was OpenSSL out of the box, I guess, doesn't look at the SSL cert file environment variable to like look up where its certs are. I actually have to patch OpenSSL in this stuff to get it to do that. But now that works, it seems to work great. And actually, lots of with like native gems and stuff. And also like native gems come with header files for the C code. And so like I can't remember exactly what I do, but I do something to like get that to work correctly. So when you do, at the end of the day, you do gem install with one of these, it works.
Because the gems have their own make file generator thing. Yeah. And when you install one that, luckily for most of the big gems that are like Nokogiri, these days they come pre-compiled and we just download the correct version right from Ruby gems. So we don't even, at least I don't, in most cases have to compile gems, it feels like, which is nice. That makes sense that that's kind of a compatibility thing to make sure that those are finding the right directories or whatever, because they're going to be potentially moved. Do you have to do any testing of that? Compile Ruby in one place and then move it to another folder and make sure that it still runs?
I don't know if I test that specific use case. I think by and large, I just assume it works because it would fail. If nothing else, it would fail when I try to use it in Mise, and it doesn't.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And like, because this is a fork project from Homebrew, it's like they were already having to deal with that. It's obviously a wildly different path than whatever it gets built on in GitHub Actions. But I do like add definitely like use cases. There's like test scenarios for like doing gem installs and stuff. It's been a lot of that, I feel like, has been actually the gem install part and less of like the Ruby binary itself having issues. Yeah, actually, I don't think there's anything I've done with Ruby. It's been OpenSSL and the gems. It's all the extra stuff.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess there's probably, who knows when, like Ruby 3 or 3.1 or something, when they took that a bit more seriously and added that flag you were talking about to make those things dynamic or whatever, or bundled into the executable or whatever. Because that, I'm sure you can't just go back to Ruby 187, and maybe you could, but it would probably be a lot of work. And I believe the Fusion Passenger team at one point had like built portable Ruby 187 or 193, and like some really old project that since been very abandoned, but it seemed like it was a ton of work back in the day.
Yeah, it seems like a few people have taken this torch, and it's like Traveling Ruby. It's a very clever name.
Yeah, that's the name of it, I think.
Oh, is that the best group? I think there was another one in the middle here too that maybe lasted a version or two, but we'll see.
Yeah.
You know, if nothing else, I hope that like having it in Mise and having that be part of the standard Rails install, like at least now there's a place. If something is over my head, at least like there is a central place that we're doing this for a lot of people. So
that hopefully will accelerate adoption too, where it's like the Rails community now is sort of put a flag in the sand that says like use Mise, rather than you go to the Ruby install page and it's like, here's 100 version managers you could use. And there's obviously like, they don't want to have a preference or whatever. They want to kind of be agnostic there, but it's like at some point it's helpful if you do, so that people can rally around polishing one solution, and then that continues to improve and just get really good over time, as opposed to lots of little areas where specific knowledge might have made one thing better there, but never gets pulled into other projects. That makes it just a bit trickier over time. You think there will be any challenges to maintaining that going forward, or will it just kind of hopefully be, I guess, automated where, and maybe you don't ever have to recompile like the oldest Rubies. All you have to do is the new ones as they come out, unless maybe there's some like, I guess, bug fix with OpenSSL or something that you discover and you got to go back and maybe recompile every one of them to correct it. But what are you thinking there in maintenance?
So I've been working on this now for about 3 months, 4 months maybe. And it's been pretty minimal. Like of all the projects I work on, this is not taking up a lot of effort. There's no open bug I'm aware of right now, which is great. But yeah, when I do find something, it usually is across all versions. I forget how far back I go. I want to say 3.2.
I think 3.2 is like, what
there's a version like 3.3.0 that it's not building. Y'all aren't.
Yeah, there's a couple odd ones like that you can't even compile it yourself from scratch or whatever. There's
really?
Bug in the release or whatever. I have a couple of those where I skip them too. Yeah.
So if that comes up, I'll rebuild them again. I am doing maybe one thing is like worth mentioning is like the way I version these is a little unorthodox, where you can't access my old builds. So I'm using like the GitHub release is like 3.3.0. There's no build revision there. And that's kind of just to make my life easier with Mise, because Mise doesn't have a concept of build revisions. I don't really want to add that. Like ultimately this hurts the user because you don't want to have to think about that. And I don't think you care, right? Like if you're using precompiled binder, you're already not very sensitive to how the sausage was made.
Right.
Downside is here is like SHAs will change if I do have to rebuild, right? So it's not perfect, but we'll see how it goes. I may regret this decision, but I think the nice thing is you can just like go to that GitHub release URL if you're using outside of Mise, and like that's the latest version, right? You have some, and you obviously you could copy it yourself and do whatever you want if you want some particular vintage of how I compiled these on some particular date, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense. And like if I did discover a bug, it's like you'll fix it. I'll just delete my local install of that version and then install the new version. And it'll just download the new executable and boom.
Yeah,
hopefully
which isn't great,
you know,
the SHAs are going to explode. But again, I may regret this, but that's the way it works right now.
Yeah, and it's subject to change or whatever. If it becomes a problem or something, then sure. But yeah, don't need to address it yet. I'm just super excited for this because it seems like I just wish we had this 12, 15 years ago. It feels like something that just should have been solved many, many moons ago, but at least it's being solved now. So you have to, if I remember right, you have to run a command to set a flag to enable this.
Yeah,
pretty straightforward, but that's really it. And then the next install you do of one of those supported versions, we'll try to download that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, anybody who's listening that wants to try it, there's a specific version of Mise that adds that functionality. They just might have to self-update or something.
Yeah, it'd be good to be on the latest. Yeah.
So in the docs, that'll be there and easy to run. I already switched over my desktop and laptop to using the precompiled ones, and I'm generally just using Ruby 4.0, so everything's been working perfectly fine. You wouldn't notice other than like that installed awkwardly fast, because usually I'm used to all right, install, go grab a drink or use the restroom or something, come back and have some wait time in there. But now it's just like, whoa, this is awesome. And it's, I don't know, something we've needed forever. So I appreciate you like taking the responsibility to like, let's make sure this moves forward. It's awesome. And same with the Spindle team working on RV, like they did a big step in this as well. I'm curious because doesn't Mise use UV underneath for Python, or do you have your own version management?
I use UV for Python dependencies. So like if you wanted to like pipx, so there's a pipx backend, so you can just install arbitrary Python packages. That is a bad name. We're probably going to change that name soon to PyPy, because it will actually use UV under the hood if it's there, just for performance sake. And there's a few ways, like Python's quite complicated. It's like virtual envs and stuff. And like, I am not a Python developer whatsoever. So I'm really an awful person to be building a dev tool that's used by so many Python developers, but I try my best. I know Ruby a lot better. Ruby's a lot simpler. And I think like the dependency story, that's never been an area that Mise touches. Mise is all about runtimes, tasks, environments. Dependencies I considered for a while. I am dabbling in it, but like, I think coming from Rust, I want that experience for everybody. And I think Spindle too, like with RV, that is their goal. And I think that and UV, I think everybody wants a cargo kind of experience for their languages, because it's way better to not have to remember bundle install, I think is the gist of it. So yeah, I'm excited to see what they're able to come up with, because it's definitely a need for that.
A couple weeks ago, like I don't use a lot of Node, and Rails in the Webpacker era was kind of like, just assume they're going to have Yarn Classic installed. It's like easy enough. But then I got into supporting Core-Pack and stuff, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is ridiculous that like you have NPM, but there's 3 or 4 versions of Yarn and then PNPM, and it just like now builds in its own shims to install these. And thank goodness that we just have Bundler, and that's all we have to worry about in Ruby, at least for now. Fingers crossed it stays that way. But the complexity of that environment is just like wild. So many different ways of installing things in the node modules folder, or no, we have a global one and we symlink those, or whatever optimizations they implement. It's like, this is just a nightmare to manage. So that brings me to a question that my coworker wanted to ask you, which was, how hard is it to maintain Mise? Because it seems like an enormous amount of work, because all these languages are quite a bit different. There's so many decisions to make along the way, like even just the Ruby releases and the versions and the SHAs. Like, I feel like there's a lot of these sort of open-ended questions that are not easy to pick an answer to without accidentally breaking changes and stuff over time. But I feel like you've been able to make it pretty darn easy to upgrade without breaking changes and stuff, but also supporting like everything. It feels like Mise just supports any language I can think of.
You know, in terms of supporting languages, like just because at work I've been doing this, right? I've been supporting languages with internal scripts and stuff. So I've had a pretty good knowledge of like what the idiosyncrasies are and what different languages are. And also like they rhyme with each other. So in a lot of ways, Python and Ruby are quite similar. For example, there's differences, but I guess I just came with the experience necessary to be idiomatic in every language best I can. Ironically, though, the one that I think Mise is terrible at is Rust. I don't like using it with Rust, and I suggest people don't. I did add it because a lot of people wanted it. Just use Rust stuff; it's better. Also, writing Rust, like Rust is the best when it comes to dev tools. It is so solid that I think it's given me a good North Star on like where I want other languages to get to. I have like very few complaints about Rust, which is why like I can't meet that standard with Mise. But yeah, with breaking changes though, like that has kind of evolved over time. From the beginning, I knew that like I had to take a pragmatic approach to it. Like I didn't think Semver was gonna work at all because so what if there's like a breaking change with like Elixir? If you're writing Node, you don't care. And I just thought there'd be so many there'd be so much noise, and we'd be at version 100 before we knew it. I just thought it wasn't realistic. And so like I approached breaking changes in a completely different way. Like I kind of think of Mise as a service and not a CLI. Because when you use a service, an API, you're using the latest, right? You don't get a choice of which version you have. You're just always on the latest. And like I've always wanted people to be able to be on the latest. Was kind of the idea that you should just always be on the latest all the time. And when there is a breaking change, let's say with Ruby, for example, like one, I try to keep them very minimal. Only if it's this is an overwhelming reason to do it. And I have a very specific procedure that I go through. So initially, nothing happens. The new feature gets added. So Ruby precompiled. You can opt into it if you look in the docs and you find that somewhere. In a few months, because it uses Calver. So I know like in version 2026.4.0, it will automatically start showing a deprecation message that this is going to become the default. If you don't want to see this message, you can default into it now, or you can explicitly opt out, and then that will stay. The reason to wait is because I found that if you just like immediately throw a deprecation message at the same time you add a new feature, then the people that opt in and then commit that configuration into their project now require all the other people using that project to update. That's frustrating. So that's why I wait a little bit, let the thing bake, give people a chance to update on their own. And then there's less of that. There's still going to be people that are on 9-month-old releases. At some point, you just got to pull the trigger, right? And so then you'll see the message a few months later. I actually, if it's something I'm removing entirely, Ruby's not a good example of that, but occasionally there are breaking changes where the old thing is just going to go away because I want to kill it. Then I actually have it fail to compile at that. Like if it's 2026.8.0, it'll just like panic when it compiles, which is just an indicator to me to go in and remove it because I don't ever remember, right? So,
right,
yeah, that's kind of how I do breaking changes. So there's kind of like there's always breaking changes happening. I try to keep them minimal, but it follows a time process and not a version process. Another thing is like you can't use old versions of Mise. There's like things baked into it that like domain names and different services that I don't control, and so like it's not realistic to run a 1-year-old version of Mise. It just isn't.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because it is, in general, you'll always want to use the latest version. There's almost no reason you would ever want that except for you. You may want to go look at and debug something or whatever and see what, like, oops, I missed something here. But as a user, I don't ever want that. That makes sense. And then I think I forget to update sometimes or whatever. And occasionally I'll remember to like homebrew update and upgrade or whatever. But and Mise ESH will prompt me occasionally. But I don't think, does Mise have any like prompt for like, hey,
No.
And I guess you're time based. So you could kind of say, hey, you're 6 months old. You might want to consider updating.
No, I used to. In fact, it used to have a kill switch in it. But if you ran a 3-year-old version or something, or maybe 2-year-old, it just wouldn't do anything. It just, nope. Like, you gotta move
funny.
now. It did have this logic where it was like a month old, it would start showing, and then like after a while, like it's just gonna kill itself because it really at that point, all bets are off and the thing is not gonna work right. For the reasons I just said, that it's just referencing stuff that lives out in the ether. It's a living project. This is very specific to Mise. None of my other projects use Calver. It's just because it's this source of all these dev tools, it has to be version, has to be kept up to date. I think I did take that out. I think just as it kind of matured and there wasn't going to be as many big changes, and it became clear to me, like, if it breaks, it'll break for the reason it broke, and I don't need to force people. But yeah, so I think I ended up taking that out. So one thing I do is I put the version everywhere. So if you run Mise install, it says the version, and I put the version in all sorts of places. And because it uses Calver, the user sees that. And so if they submit bug report, it usually doesn't get to that point. Like, they'll probably copy and paste it in and be like, oh, that I probably update this, and then it all sorts itself out. So I'm not getting a lot of issues from people that are having old versions. It's pretty rare.
And that makes sense too, that like, if I was to report a bug and saw the version, it'll immediately in my brain be like, wait, that's from 2024. Maybe I should just try to update. Because if it's version 7.32, I have no idea what the latest version is. There's no like reference there. But being calendar based, it makes total sense for just like a little trigger to the user, like, hey, you might want to update this.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That's funny. I like that a lot. Because what brought that up for me was like, I missed that in the docs about the precompiled rubies, because I poked around the docs a whole ton recently, but didn't see that. And then I was like, you know what? I've not updated Mise locally for, I don't know how long, maybe 9 months or something. And I haven't had any issues. So there's really no reason to update. And the main thing maybe is like the new features or something that I want to use. That would be the other trigger for me to update. It's like something breaks or I want to use a new feature that I don't have. But neither one of those had come up for a while until I saw the like, oh, hey, there's been precompiled rubies for a little while now. And that's something I should really be aware of. And I just missed it. But I like that. I'm going to have to maybe consider adopting that, because in Ruby, I feel like we're just semantic versioning is kind of the 99% of the way every project is managed. But that seems like for those types of things incredibly useful, where the specific version number, you're not integrating into this as a library the same way you are with like a Ruby gem or something. So it's like, breaking changes probably don't matter.
Mise has way too many releases and there's way too many changes that it is not realistic for users to read the release notes, nowhere near it. So like, it's just not an option. Like, even if I was using Zemver, like, are developers really going to pay that much attention if I'm bumping the major version? I don't know how often it would be bumped, but a lot more often than I'd like. I like it. And maybe I should use it on more projects. Like, it works so well for me. But my other projects don't, like, they tend to be like, I'll kind of be interested and I'll work on it for a bit and then I'll work on something else. But Mise is just always getting work. Even if it's not me, it's other people. There's a release every day pretty much. And I just have it. I actually have it run. I have it run in the cron. I actually built another tool to do AI release notes. This got really good because it's not just some like thing generated from the commits. Like, Claude is actually going in and like reading the source, reading all the discussions. Let's communicate if anybody was interested in using their own project. But it's basically just an LLM agent that is specific to release notes, and it does an amazing job of just kind of summarizing what happened. That'd be a full-time job for somebody, I think, just to do that. And so that's remarkable.
That makes total sense. I love that use case there. I've tried to do that, notes and whatever, and it's like you're merging PRs and you forgot that I merged these 7 and these didn't make it to the change log or something. And then you like have to go reread through the whole dang thing yourself. And it's like, just have AI summarize that. That's a great use case. And that one, Andrew, you've got the link too. So we'll have that in the notes. Andrew and David, you got any more questions?
I mean, I just want to say thank you for all these libraries. Like, you've made our lives better, not just with this new Ruby stuff, but I've been using Mise like almost since it came out, and I love it. It's like integral to my little cousin was like, I want to build my own app. I've got an idea. And I was like, okay, I can get you set up easily because all I have to do is install Homebrew and install Mise and you're good to go. So thank you for your work and your time on this.
No, thank you for using it. Appreciate that.
I've got one quick question. At risk of sounding like I'm blowing smoke or whatever, Mise is it's the gold standard now for version management, and like shying a bit away from the technical side of things. I kind of wanted to ask, when Mise kind of grew into that and kind of exploded, what did that change for you in terms of just the process of working on this and the expectations around it, and from a more personal side of things instead of like the technical conversation we've been having?
What to think about that? Because it didn't happen overnight, right? So
yeah, how long have you been working on Mise?
I think I started fall of 2022, I want to say. Yeah.
It's not that long.
Yeah. So
really not that
3.5 years. It picked up quickly. I had posted probably after I was working on it for, I think, quickly and like now it seems like ages because you could do it in a day with an LLM, but it probably took me 4 months. And I posted on like an ASDF issue about performance because that was like the main thing I was struggling with, and people immediately were using it as like their main platform. So I had users right away. It struck a chord. In hindsight, there was a need for something to fill this role of simply ASDF but faster. There really isn't any polyglot version managers aside from ASDF, and maybe Nix if you squint, maybe Docker if you're squinting very hard. But people wanted something here, and anybody could have done it, and I just happened to be the one that did. But breaking change and stuff like what I was just talking about, like that I've definitely had to refine that to get that to where it's not frustrating people. I think like the decision about like when to adopt a feature and when to pass on one is always a hard one. Like I took on task environment variables, and that was not met with universal happiness. In fact, probably more negativity than happiness. People liked Mise because it did dev tools, and that's what they wanted it for. They didn't want all this task stuff. But I really thought that was going to really empower it to be better. I think it has. I think people really have found good value in tasks. I certainly use it a lot myself. And so now I'm having to dial that back. The scope can only increase so much. And so now I have to be more careful. Like right now, there's been a couple of people that want me to improve the Docker images. There's like stock Docker images. I hate maintaining those. I don't like it. So I'm probably going to deprecate them. They've never really worked well, so it's not a big loss. There's like other things I'm considering. We'll see. This one I know would make people unhappy, but the Mise action, the GitHub action, hate maintaining that thing. Just hate GitHub actions. It sucks. I don't enjoy it. We'll see. Like there are features people want out of it, and I get it. I mean, this is a hobby, right? So I got to do the things I like to do. I don't drop things often, but I'm certainly at the maximum of what I can take on, so I have to pick and choose. I think it's been coming up more often because it has enough users. There's somebody in every part of the code base. There's every use case. And so now it's a lot more of saying no and trying to be as focused as I can on the stuff that matters to the most people. So, I do the best I can.
The Docker image, because I guess like in our Rails Docker containers, or the images are like, start from Ruby, but then like download the node executable and then untar it and then delete the tarball and whatever. Is that kind of what people are using that for? Is like, I need a Docker image with multiple languages, so it's convenient to use Mise here as well to do that, rather than starting from like just a Ruby one or something?
One's a dev container for working on Mise itself, because I don't use it. I do most of the development. It just breaks because I don't use it. But like people want to like work on Mise, and like that one I think I'm going to deprecate. It's never worked. It probably doesn't work right now. I actually think the docs do say probably don't use this. The other one is more similar to what you're saying, which it could ostensibly used by end users that like they just want a simple Docker image with Mise on it. That's not what it is. It's a full-fledged Ubuntu with a bunch of crap in it that I use for some infra. There's this thing called Mise versions that is like a server component to that. All it does is it lists all the versions of all the tools, because making GitHub API requests blows people's rate limits up. So I have a service that just does that. But for that, it has to like run through every tool, and it runs them all in a Docker sandbox. And so like I have Mise. So I use that, and that probably isn't going to change, but other people have wanted to use it because they just like want to have Mise in a Docker image, which fair enough, but like they kind of want like a lightweight, like Alpine thing or something that just like has this really simple thing. And that's not what it is. It's not really what it's made for. So that I think I'll probably deprecate. And in fact, because installing Mise into any Docker image is not hard. I could maintain a suite of them. I could have an Alpine one, like Red Hat one, but like I don't like it. I don't like being a Docker any more than I have to. So I think I'll just pass on that one.
Yeah, people just use curl. Like it works
exactly.
Same way. Every other tool. I've done a lot of Docker image stuff, and I also share your sentiment. So I'm like, yeah.
Especially around GitHub Actions.
Yeah.
That one may stick around because that one has way more value than the Docker stuff. So I can't kill that one for sure. I don't know. Don't know what to do there, but I would like to see somebody else make a really comprehensive one that wants it, because there is room for that. That would be a thing people would use that has like more advanced caching and stuff, where mine could just be like a naive version of it, kind of the MRI of the Mise action world. Well, I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. Along with David's question is like, did you get bombarded with GitHub issues and stuff when you first launched? Was that overwhelming?
I hate GitHub issues. I don't use GitHub issues on any of my projects. So, yes.
That's the trick. Turn them off.
He's a man of culture.
Yeah, I stick to discussions. And a large part of that is that there's like badge at the top of the thing that anybody with doesn't know how to use a computer can like put something on my to-do list. I find that maddening. Probably 25% of the issues are not worth my time. It's just somebody didn't read the documentation or it's a really stupid feature idea. I don't need to respond to that. And like, I don't want a badge that says, I hate that. So, I love discussions because it's like Reddit, right? It just falls to the bottom. Nobody cares about it. Nobody ever sees it again. If I'm wrong and like people search for it, then maybe it will bubble back up. And then it's great. It's not perfect. Like one of the biggest frustrations I have with discussions is you can't like close them from merging a PR like you can with an issue.
Right.
And also just like, this is open source. If there's a problem with Mise, it's not my problem. It's your problem, right? Like this is MIT license, right? It's not my problem. I do a lot to help people, but like at the end of the day, it is your problem and it's up to you to fix it. I don't think that issues solve that well.
Yeah, I remember Adam Wathan was talking about that with Tailwind CSS, where he was like, half the time people don't use it correctly, which isn't an issue for us. And half the time it's like, sounds like a bug, but it's a feature request or something. It's like the version that is out does what it does. And if there's something we told you it does, but it doesn't actually do, that's the only time I want an issue. And so he was funneling everybody over to discussions for sort of the same reason. And it's like the community also then has an opportunity to answer their own questions and help each other out a little bit. And he was like, yeah, the same frustrations where it's like, what you consider a bug is not what I consider a bug. And we have different definitions of this. And it's like, if I promise something and it doesn't actually work the way I promised, yes, then I agree it is a bug. But otherwise, it's a you problem, like you were saying. Yeah. And it just is not designed super well to, especially these days when anybody can do drive-by pull requests and whatever from LLMs. You can just get overwhelmed with that stuff pretty fast. And then you have to feel bad closing these things without putting a nice, sorry, but whatever. It just makes it so much harder to maintain open source these days. But we appreciate you doing this because it has made our lives a heck of a lot better. So
I know we have listeners at GitHub, so we need the feature to be able to close these discussions from pull requests. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that'd be killer. They've kind of approached the problem a different way that they've been talking about it. I actually don't get the PR slop that a lot of open source maintainers are complaining about. I don't know why. I give probably 10 times as many PRs as I used to, but they're actually quite good, I would say. I've had one or two really crappy ones, but...
Well, if you want some more,
yeah.
spin up some agents right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I think maybe because it's a CLI, the LLMs are good at that. I don't know, but I'm not complaining about slop. In fact, like overall, the increase in PRs has been great, I would say, because it's just been like users be able to help themselves and have great tests behind their stuff. And I had a user for Pitchfork yesterday who built end-to-end tests with like the wrong thing. Like they're supposed to be in bats and he wrote them in Rust. And I would have felt so terrible if he'd actually written that to say, you got to rewrite this. But I know he's using an LLM, so just rewrite it and easy. So I love it. As open source maintainer, at least in February 2026, this is lovely because users are able to help themselves so much, especially with Rust, right? Because most people don't know Rust, but LLMs are very good at it.
That's awesome. Well, I don't have any more questions unless you guys do.
Where can people find you online if they want to follow your content?
I'm on Blue Sky and X, JDX code on X and jdx.dev on Blue Sky. That's where I hang out the most.
Well, thanks for joining us. This was a blast.
Thanks for having me. This was lovely.
Yeah, thanks so much. Seriously, for all the tools, all the like, just even the inspiration of like, man, you can just decide one day to address a performance issue, and now look what you're doing. You're powering so many developers' machines now, which is awesome. So I've always enjoyed seeing people's projects, and then it's amazing now we have a podcast, so we have an excuse to meet you and finally, talk to you and stuff and whatever and say thanks. So this has been a super blast on my end, and hopefully we will just be pushing many, many people your way to Precompiled Rubies and get some heavy duty testing out of that before August, which right now is a handful of months away, but we'll be here probably before you know it.
Yeah. So. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. And we'll catch you guys next week.
Peace.